Hello everybody and welcome to another video. This is one in which I will be discussing the sudden power ceiling increase that the Marines just got. That's right, just like the previous chapter was intended to hype up Shanks, this one was 100% intended to hype up the Marines. There's one thing that Oda makes clear here, which he kind of made clear back in Marineford, so this serves as a reminder, and that's the fact that one of the things that the Marines have over the pirates is that the Marines are much more organized. The way the sword unit was coordinating with itself in order to be able to get all these people inside of this enclosed circular area so that Garp could come in by the end with the galaxy sweep was just awesome. And on a related note, there is a thematic link between the contents of the cover page and the characters that we see in the chapter itself, because if you notice, Hiyori is doing her origami thing, which we knew that's kind of her hobby, one of the things that she would do when she was little. By the way, I hope that Tama has taken the right precautions and is nowhere near her, so hopefully Tama has fled Wano by now in the interest of not being burned alive. JK, I'm just kidding. Or am I? Run, Tama, run! The point that I was setting off to make initially is that you have a paper crane there in the cover, as well as an actual crane, but also the scene itself appears to be set in a place that is very reminiscent of Otsuru's tea shop. So of course we know that the word tsuru in Japanese means crane, so the cover kind of evokes a lot of crane symbolism and imagery. And that goes along pretty well with the chapter because, as we later find out, a lot of the characters featured in this are actually named after birds. Hibari is the Japanese name for the Eurasian skylark, the user of the whip fruit, and Tsuru's granddaughter Kujaku's name means peacock, and the name Grus is a name that is used as a category to classify birds that belong to the crane family as well. And we've seen these characters already, either during the Capone cover story or in chapter 1061. And just as a quick FYI, when Hibari was first introduced, a lot of native Japanese speakers noticed that the way that she was expressing herself was by using a dialect that is native to Hiroshima. And the reason why that's important is because the only other character in the series that expresses himself in that same way is Akainu. So that's kind of where the theories come from about Akainu and Hibari potentially being related. And speaking of Hibari, it's likely that she might have a little crush on Koby, because she was pretty worried about him the last time we saw her. And then in this chapter, in the official translation, she says that she actually packed a lunch for him. And thanks to her, we get to see Vegapunk's gunpowder flowers in action. So that was a neat little throwback. Unfortunately, however, the fact that she looks so cool doing her job as a sniper kind of sours me a bit, because it reminds me of how poorly Oda has been handling Usopp as of late. You remember Usopp, right, Oda? You know, that guy that you made part of the main cast a long time ago? Another interesting thing worth noting here is that I think Oda just used this as an opportunity to introduce us to yet another superior devil fruit. And of course, I'm talking about the idea that perhaps Avalo Pizarro's devil fruit could be a superior version of the Ishi Ishi no Mi, or Pika's Stone fruit. Because the Island fruit appears to not have a lot of the restrictions that Pika's devil fruit has, but it also seems to operate in a similar manner. So we see that Pizarro is able to merge himself with the island, and the implications of that at this stage of the game are pretty concerning. Because think about this, all right? I'm going to the endgame level stuff. What if he merges with the Red Line, which is said to be a collection of islands and is also said to be indestructible? Or, get this, what if he merges himself with Laugh Tale? Could he merge himself with the Atom Tree or the Eve Tree as well? Because unlike Luffy, we know that Blackbeard likes to scheme. He likes to plan ahead of time. So the way I'm looking at this now is, I think that every single devil fruit that belongs to one of these Blackbeard pirates has been specifically selected by Blackbeard because they are intended to serve a purpose to make him the Pirate King. We can say the same thing about San Juan Wolf's giantification devil fruit, because we know that the government has been trying for years to try and pin down and recreate giantification. And we know for a fact that giants are going to play an important role in the endgame as well as we head to Elbaf. So we're definitely seeing the giants become more and more relevant to the story with each passing chapter. By the way, San Juan Wolf having a devil fruit isn't exactly new information. We already knew that he had a devil fruit power, we just didn't know what the name of it was. Because there was a brief moment pre-time skip where he did mention that he felt weak because he was standing in a body of water. And out of this small group of Blackbeard pirates, I definitely think that Vasco has the devil fruit with the highest creative potential, because he seems to already be referring to the flammable properties of alcohol to set the town on fire. By the way, I can't really tell if his nose is supposed to be coated in armament Haki, or if it's supposed to be sort of like that red rush that people get when they get drunk. And I'm also interested in learning whether or not his devil fruit is actually a paramecia or a logia, because as we all know, one of the requirements for a devil fruit to be classified as a logia is that it has to be naturally occurring occurring in nature. So what kind of alcohol power does he have? Is it the type of alcohol that would occur naturally through fermentation in nature? Or is it the type of alcohol that needs to go through some type of industrial / man-related process? Because if it turns out that it's the latter, that it's the type of alcohol that needs to go through some man-related process, then this devil fruit could technically be the second special paramecia that we see in the series. The first one obviously being Katakuri's Mochi Mochi no Mi.
I actually kind of have the exact same question about Vasco Shot's devil fruit that I do about Groos's devil fruit. The clay fruit, is that a paramecia, special paramecia? Is it a logia? Did he actually use some kind of awakening technique on his partner so that if he got beheaded, he wouldn't die? Also, was it ever explained what was causing that massive sewer leak at the beginning of the Super Mario movie? I feel like normally that would have led to something.
We find out that Cross Guild has assigned a value of 5 stars to Koby, which would equate to about 500 million. And despite knowing that, however, there's still not really an accurate way of being able to predict how much an Admiral would be worth yet, because aside from using stars to assign value to Marines, there's also another symbol that Cross Guild uses, and that's the symbol of the crown. We see the symbol depicted here with kids, so that could mean anything, right? And we don't know how that would change things. That being said, just for the sake of putting Koby's bounty into perspective here, 500 million is what Usopp's bounty is worth right now. It's also the amount of Big Mom's second bounty. So Big Mom was also worth 500 million when she was a lot younger, and then also 500 million was also the amount assigned to both Luffy and Law's bounties after Dressrosa. And Koby continues to make a name for himself and build up a reputation for being kind. So Oda's kind of planting the seeds there for Koby's future leadership position. We see him winning people over by helping them escape. And on a similar note, something that I think is worth mentioning from the previous chapter is that Oda made a very clear decision to point out that the little crews, the crews outside of Elbaf that Kid was targeting, Oda highlighted the fact that those crews were weak, that the crews that were being targeted cannot survive in the New World without Shanks's protection. And so one of the reasons why that got mentioned is because we all know that Luffy will eventually be in a position where he will have to surpass Shanks, and eventually he will surpass Roger as well. Now, once Luffy reaches the point in the story where he's ready to surpass Shanks, Oda will eventually write off Shanks. Oda will find a way of having Shanks be dealt with, and then once that happens, those people that depended on Shanks for protection will go under Luffy. They will be under Luffy's flag. I thought it was a cool touch that as Koby is helping these people escape, he's also training as he goes because he's carrying this pretty heavy looking ball and chain, and he's using Geppo to kick the air as well. We also learned that Teach wants Pirate Island to be recognized as a country by the world government. And again, as I said earlier, it's important to remember that this is the guy who sought the title of Shichibukai just so he could use it to gain access to Impel Down, right? So that the gates would open up for him. So there's a hidden agenda for that request, for sure. You know, why does he want to be recognized by the government? Could it have anything to do with Imu or the national treasure of Marijoa or the weapon that we saw Imu use to wipe an island off the map? Could this request from Blackbeard be the reason for why Shanks went up to talk to the Gorosei, to warn them to talk about a certain pirate? Is it possible that Shanks maybe predicted that Teach would be making this move? And the fact that Teach appears to be so interested in wanting to become affiliated with the world government, that gets me to think that, as I've said before, the government must have something in its power that is stronger than a Yonko. Right? The government has something that is Yonko level plus. And we already know, according to Doflamingo, that if you combine the national treasure of Marijoa with the immortality surgery of the Opi Opi no Mi, you can essentially become king of the world. And if it turns out that that's what Blackbeard wants, that would also fit in neatly with this idea that Teach is following in Sebek's footsteps, because we know that Sebek tried to become king of the world at one point. Wow, so I guess that's it. That's what Blackbeard wants. Well, it's a good thing that Law is nowhere near Blackbeard at the moment, right? Oh, You know, it's funny, we might be reaching a point in the story where it turns out that what happened to Kid was actually the least worst option.
Now, I don't know if it was just me, but that scene with Aokiji in the flashback where he's explaining what sword is to Teach, I feel like the reason why he's saying that is because, well, number one, it's true, and it serves as exposition for the reader, but at the same time, I think he's also saying that to try and help Koby out. Also, Kuzan's dialogue here, I think, could be taken as a pretty clear indicator that he's secretly a sword member, because for one, he knows too much about sword. You know way too much about this thing that you're not a part of. That's number one. But number two, and this goes back to a conversation that he had with Smoker in Punk Hazard. In Punk Hazard, he tells Smoker, like, Smoker, I'm still the same guy. Like, I'm still me. But then another thing he says is that because of his status, he can now do things that he wasn't able to do before when he was part of the Marines. And in his dialogue here, he literally spells it out. He says, one of the things that you can do as a member of Sword is that you can attack a Yonko without authorization. So this whole thing makes it seem as if Aokiji could be waiting for the right moment to make his move and attack Blackbeard. And so maybe what happens is that after Aokiji attacks Blackbeard, Blackbeard is like, oh, I knew you would betray me, Aokiji. And that's when Teach will finally decide to reveal who the 10th Titanic captain is. It's Green Bull! At this point, I feel like it has to be either Green Bull or Rouge. And speaking of Aokiji, the Blackbeard pirates currently appear to be divided into 3 groups. There is the Winter Island group that was fighting Law. There is the Hashinosu group that we just saw. And there's also that ship that is headed towards Egghead at the moment. Now, assuming that there are no Blackbeard pirates from the Winter Island group aboard that ship, then by method of elimination, the people aboard that vessel have to be Aokiji, Katarina Devon, Lafitte, and possibly the 10th Titanic captain. Those are the only other members that we haven't seen be part of these other 2 groups. Also, according to this chapter, apparently Blackbeard is a slave owner because he was keeping slaves on the island and he was planning on selling them. It kind of gets me to wonder how much of that is influenced by his desire to be recognized by the government. Like, is he trying to prove that he can be just as awful as they are? Something else we learned that I think a lot of us already suspected is that the Rocky port is part of Hashinosu, which means that Koby and Law had already been in Hashinosu before, right? They were there during the Rocky port incident. So Law and Koby already know this island. It's not the first time that Koby has been here.
Turns out Perona played a pretty important role in freeing both Koby and Moria, and I like that because it's a glimpse of characterization, because not only does it mean that Perona was loyal enough to risk her life to try and free her captain, but it also means that Moria stuck to his guns and that he refused to bow down and to join Teach, and that's why he was being kept in a cell. We get a shot of Tashigi along with Garp and Helmeppo, and the fact that she's there with them kind of gets me to think about whether she's actually a member of Sword or not. And I'm also wondering if this is why her partner isn't there with her anymore. Because if Tashigi is not a Sword member, then she's kind of technically the only one that doesn't fit with the group in terms of status. Because Garp is already retired, and all the other Marines that we see here are Sword members. Also, I'm kind of wondering if that coup de burst technique that they're using was actually inspired by Luffy getting away from Garp in Water 7. Maybe Garp saw that and he was like, huh, I'll try something like that next time. Now, as he comes down with the strike, we get this brief moment with Koby that is very reminiscent of Ace's thoughts back in Marineford. He's questioning, like, am I worth it? You know, why are these people doing this for me? Why would you come so far for me? And I feel like you could interpret that in different ways, because for one, Ace was a pirate, so Garp was kind of on a leash throughout Marineford. The point here is that maybe this is the beginning of Garp releasing all that pent-up guilt and resentment that he's carried over the years for not being able to help Ace. And he's using Advanced Conquerors Haki, which is revolutionary. It's major. It is a big deal, not just for Garp, but for the top brass of the Marines. This is the first time ever in the story where we've seen an actual Marine use Conquerors Haki. So no matter what ends up happening to Garp, he'll always have that sort of staple that he was the first Marine in the entire story of One Piece to show Conquerors Haki. I mean, we know that Sengoku also has Hashoko Haki. It's just never been shown in the manga. Sengoku having Conquerors Haki is something that we learned from a Vivre card. And even with Sengoku being a confirmed user, I feel like there was always sort of like that doubt. Like it was still kind of up in the air. I think a lot of people deep down thought, is it really possible for a Marine to actually have Conquerors Haki? Or is that a power that's just reserved for pirates? And so now we're seeing it here, that it is possible for top tier Marines to have the color of the Supreme King and use it in combat. And it makes perfect sense for Garp to have it, because before his execution, Roger stated that him and Garp had tried killing each other dozens of times, and Roger was going around throwing divine departures back in the day. So there's no way Garp would have been able to compete with Roger if he didn't have it. Plus, it's likely that this also confirms that Sengoku has the advanced version as well, since Roger considered Garp and Sengoku to be around the same level. And considering that both Luffy and Garp have King's Haki, it is now essentially a guarantee that Dragon has it as well. And this is not only supported by Vice Admiral Doberman's statement when he says that Luffy being able to use the color of the Supreme King is not surprising, given that he's Dragon's son, but it's also supported by Ivankop's comment about how Luffy using this type of Haki erases any doubt that he is Dragon's blood.
Now, something I've noticed over the years is that sometimes Oda has this tendency to create characters and pair them up. And he pairs them up for story purposes, but he also kind of pairs them up to let the readers know, hey, like these two characters that I'm putting here, yeah, they're kind of comparable to some extent. So for example, Law and Kid would be one of these pairs. Another pair that I can think of is Roger and Garp. Garp and Sengoku is another pair. Kaido and Big Mom I think, is also another pair. Another example of these pairs is Blackbeard and Shanks. I think that's another pair inside of Oda's mind that he uses to advance the narrative. And then another pair that I think is going to be super important in the future, and unfortunately it's the pair that we know the least about, is Dragon and Akainu. What we know so far is that Dragon and Akainu are the same age. During Marineford, it's pretty obvious that aside from Akainu obviously knowing Dragon in person, right? It's obvious that Dragon did something that left a mark in Akainu's life. Because during Marineford, he keeps saying, Dragon's son, Dragon's son. He doesn't refer to Luffy as Luffy. He's always Dragon's son. I'm going to kill Dragon's son. I won't let Dragon's son escape. Give me Dragon's son. And this whole thing goes along perfectly with the very plausible theory that Dragon at one point used to be a Marine. So maybe through Garp's intervention, or maybe from Garp pushing him and urging him, at one point in his life, Dragon decided to enlist in the Marines, and he was there for a while, but then he ended up leaving. This would explain why Doberman actually knows that Dragon can use King's Haki. Now, if it is the case that Dragon and Akainu developed a rivalry while Dragon was in the Marines, and given the fact that we know, I've given you the evidence that shows, that points to Dragon having King's Haki. And we know that one of the qualities of having the color of the Supreme King is that people are drawn to you, that you have like leadership qualities. So you have these two guys, one of which became the leader of the Revolutionary Army, the other one became Fleet Admiral. And Akainu has like people like Green Bull saying that, oh, I really like his style. I kind of like the way he does things. That kind of stuff. Like, to me, it would make very little sense if it actually turns out that Dragon has King's Haki, but Akainu does not.
In Fishman Island, we learned from Jinbei that Sengoku resigned and that he nominated Aokiji for the position of Fleet Admiral, but that the people at the very top wanted Akainu instead. And so with that in mind, given that we know that Sengoku is a Conquerors Haki user, it would make very little sense for the people at the top to be supporting a candidate that doesn't have Conquerors Haki to replace Sengoku. Additionally, when Luffy uses that type of power in Marineford, Akainu says that it doesn't look like he used it consciously, which at the very least lets us know that Akainu is well aware of what it would look like for somebody to use that power consciously. Also, during the final clash of Wano, when Kaido uses his Magma Dragon, Luffy says that he doesn't have to worry about melting because Hyogoro taught him how to land punches without making direct contact. And since this can be seen as a counter for Akainu's Devil Fruit power, it would follow that Akainu would need something stronger than just his base Devil Fruit power to be able to pose a threat to Luffy. So I'm thinking that his Logia Awakening would have to be hot enough to bypass Luffy's Haki, or he has to be able to use Advanced Conqueror's Haki. Then again, both of those options are not mutually exclusive, and Akainu can use them both in the final fight. Finally, if we look at the way in which Luffy learned how to infuse his attacks with Conqueror's Haki, the first step for him was to learn how to use Advanced Armament Haki first, which is something that we learned that all three of the original Admirals already had a really good grasp on pre-time skip.
So the bottom line here is that given what we just saw here with Garp, from a story standpoint, from a character standpoint, just in general, it would make no sense for Akainu to not have COC, and also to not have the advanced version of COC. At the very least, endgame villain material Akainu should be able to do what Garp did with advanced COC in this chapter.
And this is also supported by the fact that in Dressrosa, Oda decides to make Luffy give Don Chinjiao's drill head back, which Garp had taken away, therefore suggesting that Luffy will be the one to surpass his grandfather. Which also consequently means that Luffy will eventually have to fight and overcome a Marine with more impressive feats than Garp.
And then again, as I've said before, Logia Awakenings are going to turn out to be some broken stuff. The smartest man in the world couldn't replicate these Devil Fruits. He could replicate Kaido's Devil Fruit, but not a Logia. Like, if you were to take a blood sample from Akainu, Vegapunk would look at that and be like, I don't know what to do with this. It's too much. I like how in the beginning Pizarro is making such a big deal about not causing damage to the island, and then Garp comes in there by the end with Galaxy Impact, possibly leaving a giant-sized crater there. Speaking of Garp's Haki, I've seen a lot of people point to this scene in Marineford where Luffy punches him with Gear Second and just sends him flying out of the platform. So I feel like that moment is going to become even more relevant very soon, because so in that scene, the reason why Luffy is able to do what he does to Garp is because Garp completely holds back. In fact, you can actually see him in the anime. You can see a scene that is a close-up of his eye, and you can actually see how he turns off his Haki, because his emotions for Luffy come into play. And I know you're going to say that that's just a quote and I'm making things up, but here's the thing. In Wano, it is confirmed that Haki kind of functions this way because Sanji tells Black Maria that as she is hitting him, his Haki has been softened because he doesn't want to cause a lady harm. And so I think the same thing happened there with Garp in Marineford with Luffy. And because of this chapter, I think that Oda is setting things up so that it could happen again, only this time the Blackbeard pirates get their hands on Koby and use Koby to blackmail Garp. And if that happens, if Garp does in fact go down by being blackmailed, by being cheap-shotted in a way by the Blackbeard pirates, then that also sets the stage for Koby to grow even more. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents in terms of where this could be headed. I thought this chapter was a great sort of interlude chapter because there was no chapter last week and there's not going to be a chapter next week. So just getting a chapter of this caliber and tone in the middle of those 2 breaks, I think is a really good thing. Thank you for watching and thank you for all of your support. Hopefully I made you think about some stuff that you hadn't thought about before. Take care. Have a great week. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.